Grand Summoners. You know it. You may love it. You may hate it. Either way, we both are accustomed to what GS is. This fantasy world with a pretty good cast of characters that tells some kind of story here. I haven't paid attention to the story since chapter 5. But even with that being said, these characters still kind of made their way into a lot of people's hearts. I guarantee you, most people don't really know about the KOB story, but a lot of people love Vox, or a character like Juno, which we still need an ascended version of. Why do we not have an ascended version? What is wrong? But one thing GS devs do to kind of bring in new players and to excite old players is not only give us a bunch of new original characters here and there, but also bring in crossover characters. And these crossovers range from something that's incredible to something that is, oh god. With Grand Summoners being so old, at this point, the crossovers are kind of the main way they get people to keep playing, apart from just, being attached to their story or having sunk cost fallacy kick in. And with the rise of brand new gacha games coming out every single week, it's no surprise that without crossovers, GS would definitely struggle in this current ecosystem. And it's kind of worked for them in the past with the crossovers. A lot of crossovers have brought in a bunch of new people, a bunch of people have wanted to stick around and see what happens next or what's the next crossover, and it became something like Puzzles and Dragons, where Puzzles and Dragons is pretty much like the Smash Ultimate of the gacha scene. GS I don't think is on that level yet, but we're definitely, we're getting there. We're probably like the Smash Melee, Smash Brawl at this point. This reliance on crossovers has become too crucial to Grand Summoner's success. See, GS's entire relevance, the entirety of if this game is in a good state or bad state, relies on what crossover comes to the game. If we get a poor crossover or a rerun crossover that doesn't add anything, people are uninterested. They don't want to engage with the game by any means, and they'll just wait out till something else comes, which really isn't bad at all. I mean, that's not really a terrible thing, but it will become a terrible thing if it keeps happening over and over and over, because the revenue streams right now are not looking too great. Having one down crossover or one kind of somewhat bad or uninteresting crossover isn't necessarily the worst here and there, but having it back to back in a row is definitely gonna be problematic. These crossovers aren't necessarily doing anything different than any of the other crossovers that we've had in the past. They're following the exact same formula that GS knows works, and they're just literally copy and pasting, which could be an issue on its own. But that's another topic for another video. We're focusing on the now. But one thing about this formula that the Grand Summoners team I don't think has accounted for, what happens if they get a crossover that isn't that big for the Western audience? Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Madoka. Now, I have to preface this every time I say something about this or speak on it, is that I'm not saying Madoka is a bad IP or it is a terrible story, has terrible characters, anything like that. I'm just saying that the presence of this in the West is very non-existent. And let's be honest here, it's not necessarily surprising that this isn't big in the West. This is a very big thing, like when it comes to game developing as well. Like if you're a Japanese developer porting something to like the Western audience, sometimes you have to make changes in your game to quote unquote appeal to the West. Not too much anymore because the Western audience has gotten a bit more accustomed to how stories and characters and all this other stuff looks. But to give you an example, Nier Gestalt. Nier Gestalt on the PS3, it was pretty much one-to-one with the original Nier. However, the main character had a complete visual overhaul, all due to the fact that they thought that a more younger, teenage kind of protagonist wouldn't appeal to the Western audience who was more into maybe, gritty, buff, muscular men. And even though this isn't the exact same thing, I feel like we're seeing a version of this when it comes to Madoka. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see it again when it comes to the next crossover that looks really good, Toho. These crossovers being primarily dominated by young girls definitely doesn't bode well for majority of people in GS and just the average consumer. Some people don't care too much about the character designs, they're not that big, but it's just kind of the essence of it. It's just a bit weird and it's just kind of whatever, People would rather play with a demonic mommy than a unit that looks like she could possibly be your little sister. And I feel like GS knew about this. They knew this was going to kind of happen, so they try to make these units really appealing by their kits. Like Sayaka, for an example, is one of the best taunt tanks we've ever seen, or even Madoka, which is a very strong support unit, but even with this, we're still not getting there, People aren't really caring or interested because it kind of comes to another issue, where if you already have very good characters in Grand Summoners, there's no reason for you to necessarily get more characters unless you're struggling to clear a very specific piece of content. Because once you get to the end game, you're pretty much just collecting characters in hopes of being able to use them, or they're going to be like the greatest thing ever when this unknown piece of content comes out. Especially when it comes to the global side of the game, because stuff just moves a bit weird over here. Now whether that's good or bad for the game, hey, you can decide that yourself. But hopefully you can see now that GS's overly reliance on crossovers could be its downfall, apart from, you know, all the very bad decisions they've made over the last year. You guys let me know down below how you all feel about this. If you think the crossovers are kind of the issue, or is it possibly just the quality? Should they consider the Western audience more whenever they go to make these crossovers, considering that global is their main moneymaker? You know, all that type of stuff down below in the comment section. I would love to hear it. You guys already heard my opinion, so if you enjoyed it, I recommend you click on this video right here. It's a great piece of content. I'll meet you over there. Before you leave, don't forget to drink water.